Hey everyone, this is David Pike, the Motorcity Mechanic. Today I've got a video that's going to be on Dodge Durangos and Jeep Grand Cherokees from the years 2011 all the way up to 2015. I want to show you step by step how to remove the front hub bearing assembly, everything from what size sockets to everything from the torque that's needed to put everything back together. Now, this procedure is actually on a two-wheel drive, so we won't be dealing with the front axle on a four-wheel drive. So, two-wheel drive, 2011 to 2015 Dodge Durangos as well as Jeep Grand Cherokees. Check it out. Alright, in order to get that hub bearing assembly, which has the studs made onto it, we need to get to the bolts on the back side. But before we do that, we're going to disassemble things in stages. We're going to get this caliper mount slash caliper off. I'm going to do it all as one piece. I'm not going to separate the caliper from the mount. We'll just go ahead and unbolt the whole mount. We're going to set that to the side and then we'll get the rotor off. Once we get the rotor off, we'll have better access to getting to the hub bearing assembly. Now, this rotor's never been off. It still has the rubber O-ring they put on here. They use it for during manufacturing. When they're putting everything together, they'll put the O-ring on there to keep the rotor in place so it don't fall off while they're assembling everything. So we'll be getting this rubber O-ring off. You can put it back on if you want. If it tears, don't worry about it. It's not needed. So what we need to do is get access to the back corner. Alright, so now what I want to do is I want to go ahead and get me a large screwdriver or a pry bar to sit down in here. I'm going to pry on the rotor up against the caliper so I can get the pistons going slightly. That way it aids in getting this on and off. Especially if you got any kind of groove or lip on the rotor, you're going to want to get these pistons in so that you can clear it. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to doing that. Like I said, I'm just using a long screwdriver. I can get up in here where the rotor is and I can actually push slightly and I can actually feel the caliper moving. And that's what I want. I just want the pistons to go into where I have some movement so that way I can clear that rotor easily in case it has a lip. This one doesn't have much of them, but you never know. So try to, like I said, get up in here with something like a long screwdriver if you can and kind of press that piston in. Just the same thing if you were taking the caliper off for doing brakes, stuff like that. I'm doing this just so I can clear the rotor. So now we can go ahead and, like I said, we're going to take the caliper and caliper mount off as an assembly. And the way I'm going to do that is you've got two 13/16 bolts on the back side. Now looking at that brake caliper from the back side, here are your two 13/16 that we're going to be taking loose. I'm just going to use an impact. I'm using a swivel actually on this one so I can get it off, but we'll get those two 13/16 off and set the caliper off to the side. There we go, we've got it loose. We set it off to the side. I don't like it to just hang, so I try to put it somewhere, like if I can put it up here on the control arm, so be it, that'll work great. I can also get me a bungee cord in the meantime while I'm waiting here, and I can tie it up to keep it supported. That way it's not just hanging by the brake line and can cause some damage to that. So I'll definitely get me a bungee cord for that. And then we'll worry about getting this rotor off. Now we're down to that O-ring holding the rotor in place. Now, like I said, you can reuse the O-ring if you want. I don't have a need to. It's only put on during the manufacturing process as far as putting the rotor up there so it doesn't want to fall off while they're working. Otherwise, once you put it up, then the wheel tighten down. It's not needed. So some vehicles used to have a little clip around where the studs are. They just went with an O-ring here. This one's already ready to come loose now. If it didn't come loose, you might have to tap on this surface right here a few times with a hammer, try to break it loose. Just don't hit your studs and don't hit the contact surface to finally get it loose. Now, if we were turning the rotors, I'd probably mark where the stud was on the rotor. But being that the hub's being replaced and it includes the studs, it's not going to matter then. I like to keep everything in the same location it came off, but like I said, it's not going to matter. Alright, so now we're down to the hub itself. Now this is a two-wheel drive, so there is no axle coming through the center, so I don't have to worry about an axle nut. All I got is 3 bolts on the back side I got to take loose. This also, the ABS is actually on the spindle, on the knuckle I guess you could say of the spindle, so it doesn't go through the hub bearing, so I don't have to worry about that either. So at this point we'll go ahead and get to the back side so we can get to those 3 bolts that hold the hub assembly on. I've repositioned everything out of the way. The caliper's still floating here like I showed you with the bungee cord. You got this bolt, and this bolt. That's the only 3 holding this hub assembly on. Now I'm using a 15mm socket That's what I'm going to use to back these 3 out. And once we get them off, we might have to tap on the hub to get it out of the knuckle or spindle, however you want to call it, assembly on this. Now, being that this is kind of low miles, everything wants to come off easily, so I need to kind of support this hub bearing assembly while I back off that last bolt. Now on the back side, there's actually a plate that the 3 bolts go through on this one, so keep that in mind when you're going back with it. And also the backing plate is sandwiched between the hub and the spindle, so when you take it off, it's going to have a tendency to want to fall, so be ready to catch it. Now we got the old one off. Now the new one, the insulation is going to be the opposite. Well, make sure we hold the backing plate up here, and you need to leave the opening in the backing plate where the brake caliper goes, of course, common sense there. And we're going to line up the new spindle or hub bearing assembly, and then we're going to put the 3 bolts on the back side and we'll torque them down. Now the torque on these 3 bolts that we took off, the 15 millimeters for that hub bearing assembly, and we're going to torque those down to 78 foot-pounds. 78 foot-pounds. Now I've got the bolts torqued down on the back side. I want to do a combination of 2 things. Put the rotor up here, caliper assembly, and start the 2 bolts, the 13/16 that we're holding the caliper mount in place. So I got my rotor. Go ahead and take my bungee cord off. And position my caliper where it needs to go. I'll start in tightening 2 bolts to hold the caliper mount in place, and then we'll worry about torquing those down. Once we get those torqued down, we'll just double check and make sure we don't have any issues where maybe the caliper rotated around while it was being supported. We want to make sure that the brake line is straight as far as the rubber portion has no pigtails in there, or we may have rotated it 360 degrees out. We also want to make sure that all our wiring, for example the speed sensor here, is routed properly. So once those are torqued down, then we'll worry about just getting the tire on. Those 2 13/16 bolts that hold the caliper mount, caliper assembly, everything to the spindle, we're going to torque that down to 144 foot-pounds. 144 foot-pounds, and make sure that's torqued down properly. That's so everything's back in place. Like I said, do your final inspection. Make sure everything slides properly. Make sure that rotor's in place. Make sure the ABS speed sensor's routed properly. Make sure that you didn't twist the brake caliper when you went back on and got a pigtail inside this rubber line for the brake line. You want to make sure it stays straight, because if you've got it and it hanged, it could twist, and you don't want to pinch the line. Make sure everything's routed properly. Everything looks good, feels good, everything rotates freely. We're going to go ahead and put the tire on. Like I was saying, just make sure that you check the caliper operation, make sure everything's sliding good, spin the rotor, make sure everything's alright, and don't have no pigtails in that rubber brake line where you might have rotated the brake caliper incorrectly before you put it on. And make sure that speed sensor is clipped in place as far as the harness, usually along the brake line. Double check those things. As long as you get everything torqued back together, put your tire back on, drive it, and make sure you don't hear anything as far as a rumble afterwards. So at this point, I ask for any kind of thumbs up on YouTube. Don't forget to check me out on Facebook, and you can also follow me on Twitter and also Instagram now. Also, you can email me at david@motorcitymechanic.com if you got any kind of questions. Anything pertaining to Dodge, Chrysler, Jeep, anything like that, just let me know. In the meantime, don't stop watching.